Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something that you guys use every day as ABA professionals. So, positive and negative reinforcement.
Oh, yeah.
You hear these terms all the time, but really understanding how they work, I think, can make a huge difference in how effectively we apply them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So get ready to have those aha moments.
Yeah.
We'll clarify what these terms actually mean in ABA, see how they play out in real-world scenarios, and we'll tackle some of the challenges that they might present.
It's amazing how much depth there is to these concepts. Like,
Yeah.
you think you might have it down, and then suddenly there's like a whole new layer to consider.
Right. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Yeah.
But instead of tears, we get those satisfying, now I get it moments.
Yes, exactly.
To start off, let's just break down the foundation.
Yeah.
What exactly is a reinforcer, and how does it lead to reinforcement?
Okay, so a reinforcer is anything that makes a behavior more likely to happen again. It could be like a tangible item, praise, attention, or even just escaping something unpleasant.
Oh, okay.
And then reinforcement is the process of that event or object, like actually strengthening the behavior.
So the reinforcer is the thing itself, and reinforcement is the effect it has on the behavior.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that we can't just like assume something is a reinforcer. We only know it's truly working if we see that behavior happening more often because of it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's talk about the two main types of reinforcement, positive and negative.
Yes.
They both increase behavior, but in different ways. What's the key difference?
Okay, so with positive reinforcement, we're adding something desirable after the behavior occurs.
Okay.
So think about like giving a high five to a child who completes a task independently. You're adding that positive interaction, which makes them more likely to do the task on their own again. On the other hand, with negative reinforcement, it's about removing something aversive.
So like when we finally clean our desks to get rid of that, like, nagging feeling of clutter and chaos.
Yes, exactly. The relief from that unpleasant feeling reinforces the cleaning behavior, making you more likely to do it again eventually.
Right.
And remember, positive and negative here aren't about good versus bad. They're just about adding or taking something away.
Okay, that's a really helpful way to think about it. It takes the judgment out of those terms.
Yeah.
One of our sources actually highlighted how easy it is to get tripped up by those labels.
Right.
They talk about an employee who was always helping colleagues with coffee orders whenever things were slow at his station.
Mm-hmm.
And the supervisor, trying to be encouraging, said, "Good job," and gave the employee a quick touch on the shoulder.
That seems like a pretty standard positive interaction, but it's a great example of why knowing your individual is so key.
Right. And it turned out that the employee actually hated being touched.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the supervisor meant well, it ended up being the opposite of reinforcing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a great reminder that what's reinforcing for one person might be completely aversive for another.
Exactly.
And that's why in ABA, careful observation and really knowing the individual is so important.
It's all about individualization.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so we've talked about positive reinforcement, but let's shift gears to negative reinforcement for a moment. This is where things get really interesting, because one of our sources actually suggests that even though it's often overlooked, negative reinforcement is actually the dominant force in a lot of organizations.
Oh, yeah.
That surprised me. Why do you think that is?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think it just comes down to the fact that negative reinforcement often operates under the radar. Like, we don't always recognize it because it's not as obvious as someone receiving a reward or praise.
So it's like a hidden motivator.
Exactly. Think about deadlines. Most of us aren't working on that report because we're excited about the report itself, right?
Right.
We're working to avoid the negative consequences of missing the deadline criticism from our boss, a hit to our performance review, or maybe even like losing our job.
It's like we're driven by the stick more than the carrot in a lot of cases.
That's a great analogy, and while avoiding those negative consequences can be effective in the short term, relying too heavily on negative reinforcement can come at a cost.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of the experts cited in our sources, W. Edwards Deming, he argued that it can actually hinder growth and improvement.
That's counterintuitive. How so?
Well, when people are constantly focused on just like avoiding negative outcomes, they may not be as motivated to go above and beyond. They might do just enough to avoid the stick, but they're not necessarily striving for excellence or taking risks to innovate.
So it kind of creates this like just enough mentality.
Yes.
That can stifle creativity and progress.
Precisely. And our sources point to the Enron scandal as like a really dramatic example of how this can play out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, some believe that the executives' unethical accounting practices were driven, in part, by a desire to avoid negative financial consequences.
Hmm.
They were so focused on preventing losses that they crossed ethical boundaries.
That's a chilling example of how negative reinforcement taken to an extreme can have pretty disastrous consequences.
Yeah,
It really highlights the need for a more balanced approach, right?
absolutely.
One that incorporates the power of positive reinforcement.
Yes, creating a climate that encourages growth and recognizes achievements is crucial.
That's a great segue to our next topic,
Uh,
the power of positive reinforcement and why it's so essential.
yes.
We touched on it briefly, but what are some of its unique benefits, especially compared to negative reinforcement?
One of the most striking differences is the impact on the overall work environment. While negative reinforcement can create a sense of tension and anxiety, positive reinforcement fosters a more supportive and encouraging atmosphere.
So it's not just about getting the work done, it's about how people feel while they're doing it.
Exactly. When people are consistently recognized and appreciated for their efforts, it leads to improved relationships between colleagues and supervisors, increased job satisfaction, and just a general boost in morale.
It's like creating a positive feedback loop,
Yeah,
where positive reinforcement just leads to more positive outcomes.
that's a great way to put it. And here's another crucial point. Most performance issues are actually motivational in nature.
Oh, interesting.
This means people are capable of doing the work, but something is holding them back.
Uh-huh.
Positive reinforcement can be incredibly effective in addressing these motivational challenges.
So it's not about a lack of skill or ability,
Right.
but a lack of motivation or engagement.
Precisely. And when you look at statistics from studies like the Towers-Watson Global Workforce Study and the Robert Half International Research, you see that a lack of recognition and appreciation is a major factor in employee turnover and disengagement.
That's a huge red flag for organizations.
Yeah.
It really underscores how vital positive reinforcement is, not just for individual well-being, but for the health of the entire workplace.
It really is. Positive reinforcement helps create a culture of positive accountability. When people feel valued and appreciated, they're more likely to be receptive to feedback and committed to continuous improvement.
It's like building a foundation of trust and mutual respect, which makes it easier to address areas for growth.
Exactly. People are more likely to be open to feedback and willing to put in the effort to improve when they feel genuinely supported.
This has been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's making me think differently about how I approach reinforcement in my own practice. But before we move on, there's one more concept I want to unpack: extinction. This one seems to be a source of confusion for a lot of people.
Right.
Can you give us a clear definition of what it is and how it works?
Of course. Extinction is the process of a behavior decreasing when it's no longer reinforced. Think of it like putting money into a vending machine, but nothing comes out.
Oh, okay.
You might try a few more times, but eventually you'll give up because that behavior of putting money in is no longer producing the desired outcome, your snack.
So it's about breaking that link between a behavior and the reinforcer that was maintaining it.
Exactly. And this is a powerful concept to understand because extinction is at play in so many aspects of behavior change.
Can you give us some examples of how extinction might be used in an ABA context?
Absolutely. Let's say a child is calling out in class to get attention. If the teacher consistently ignores those callouts, the child learns that that behavior is no longer an effective way to get attention.
So it's about teaching them that the old behavior doesn't work anymore.
Exactly. However, it's important to remember that extinction doesn't always happen smoothly.
What do you mean?
Well, when a behavior that was previously reinforced suddenly stops working, we often see something called an extinction burst.
An extinction burst. What's that?
It's basically a temporary increase in the frequency or intensity of the behavior as the individual tries to figure out why their go-to strategy isn't working anymore. Think about that child calling out in class. When their callouts are ignored, they might initially call out even louder or more frequently.
Like a last-ditch effort to get that reinforcement back.
Precisely, and this is where it's crucial to be consistent. Giving in during an extinction burst even once can actually reinforce the unwanted behavior, making it even harder to extinguish in the future.
So consistency is key, especially during that initial extinction burst phase.
Absolutely. And it's also crucial to pair extinction with positive reinforcement for an incompatible behavior.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So if we're trying to extinguish those callouts, we might simultaneously reinforce the child for raising their hand to get the teacher's attention.
Hmm.
By reinforcing this alternative behavior, we're not only reducing the callouts, but also teaching a more appropriate way to get their needs met.
It's like providing a replacement behavior that serves the same function,
Yes.
but in a more acceptable way.
Exactly. And this approach can be applied in all sorts of settings, not just with children.
Right.
Think about implementing a new procedure in the workplace.
Okay.
If you want employees to adopt the new way of doing things, you have to ensure the old way no longer works, while simultaneously reinforcing the use of the new procedure.
So it's about making the old way less appealing
Right.
and the new way more rewarding.
Precisely. And by understanding extinction, we can manage those tricky transition phases more effectively.
This is all so fascinating. I feel like I'm finally understanding these concepts on a deeper level. Okay, so we've talked about extinction, but how is that different from forgetting?
Okay, yeah.
They both result in a decrease in behavior, but they're not the same thing, right?
You're right. While both forgetting and extinction lead to a decline in behavior, they happen for different reasons. Forgetting happens because the effects of reinforcement weaken over time. Imagine you haven't ridden a bike in years. You might remember the basics, but your skills will be rusty because the reinforcement of successfully riding has diminished over time.
So it's like the memory's fading because it hasn't been reinforced.
Exactly. Now, extinction happens because the behavior no longer produces the reinforcer. It's not that the memory has faded, but that the link between the behavior and the reinforcer has been broken.
It's not about time passing, it's about the consequence changing.
Exactly. Forgetting is like a faded photograph, while extinction is like cutting the string on a balloon. It's no longer tied to what was holding it up.
That's such a helpful way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've defined reinforcers and reinforcement, explored the differences between positive and negative reinforcement, and dove into the power of extinction.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into some core ABA principles.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple concepts can have such a profound impact on behavior change.
I completely agree, and I think the real magic happens when we start to apply this knowledge in our everyday practice.
Absolutely. That's where we really see the power of these principles come to life.
Okay, so we talked about how important positive reinforcement is.
Right.
But one thing that keeps coming up in our source material is the idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Well, absolutely. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's why understanding the different types of reinforcers and how to use them strategically is so crucial.
Can you walk us through some of those different types?
Sure. One way to categorize them is to think about primary and secondary reinforcers. So primary reinforcers are those things that are inherently reinforcing because they're tied to our basic biological needs like food, water, warmth, and sleep. Like we don't have to learn to find these things rewarding.
They're like our built-in motivators.
Exactly. Secondary reinforcers, on the other hand, are things that become reinforcing through their association with primary reinforcers or other already established secondary reinforcers.
So it's the learned association.
Yes.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. Think about a young child learning to respond to praise. At first, praise might not mean much to them, but if that praise is consistently paired with hugs, attention, or maybe a favorite snack, things that are already reinforcing, it starts to become a reinforcer itself.
So it's like those things become linked in the child's mind.
Exactly. And this process of association is happening all the time throughout our lives.
Right.
Think about money. Money itself isn't inherently rewarding. It's just paper and metal. But because it allows us to obtain things that we want and need, it becomes a really powerful secondary reinforcer.
It's like a symbol for all those other things that we find reinforcing.
Precisely. And understanding this distinction between primary and secondary reinforcers can be really helpful in ABA practice. It helps us to identify what might be motivating for a particular individual and to tailor our interventions accordingly.
So instead of just assuming we know what someone finds reinforcing, we need to pay attention to their individual preferences and responses.
Exactly. And that might involve a bit of trial and error. We might need to experiment with different types of reinforcers to see what really resonates with a particular individual.
It's about being a good detective,
Yes.
observing those subtle cues and making adjustments as we go.
Absolutely. Within the realm of secondary reinforcers, there are two types that are particularly relevant to our work in ABA. social reinforcers, and tangible reinforcers.
Okay, let's break those down. What are social reinforcers?
Social reinforcers are things we do or say to express approval, appreciation, or recognition.
Okay.
So things like praise, compliments, high fives, or even just a smile and a thank you can be incredibly powerful social reinforcers.
They're about those positive interactions that make people feel good.
Exactly, and our sources emphasize that social reinforcement should really be the foundation of any effective intervention plan.
Okay.
It's the most natural, the most readily available, and often the most effective way to shape and maintain behavior.
It's about building those positive relationships
Yeah.
and creating a supportive environment.
Absolutely. And while social reinforcers should be our go-to, there are times when we might also incorporate tangible reinforcers, those concrete physical rewards.
Can you give us some examples of those?
Sure. Tangible reinforcers could be anything from stickers and small toys to privileges, preferred activities, or even something like a gift card or a special outing.
So it's about giving something concrete that the person values.
Exactly. And while tangible reinforcers can be very motivating, our sources highlight the importance of using them thoughtfully and strategically.
Okay.
One of the key points they make is to always pair a tangible reinforcer with a social reinforcer.
Why is that so important?
Well, because the true power of a tangible reinforcer often lies in the social recognition that it represents.
It's not just about the object itself, but about what it symbolizes.
Mhm.
Our sources share an anecdote about a manager who was giving an employee a toaster that they had earned through a points program.
Okay.
And instead of presenting it with genuine appreciation, the manager was kind of dismissive, saying something like, "Here's your toaster, now get back to work."
Ouch. That kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Completely. The manager missed the opportunity to reinforce not just the behavior, but the value of the employee's contributions. The toaster itself wasn't the real reinforcer. It was the recognition it represented.
So it's not just about what we give, but how we give it. A
Exactly.
social interaction is so crucial.
Absolutely. A simple, "I'm so proud of your hard work, you really earned this," can make all the difference.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so we've got social reinforcers, those everyday expressions of approval and appreciation, and we've got tangible reinforcers, those more concrete rewards. But how do we know which ones will be truly effective for a particular individual? That's where careful observation and individualized planning come in.
Right.
We need to pay attention to what makes each person tick, what gets them excited, what makes them feel valued and appreciated. It might be different for everyone.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Exactly, and that's what makes this work so challenging, but also so rewarding.
Right.
We get to be creative and find those unique ways to motivate and support the individuals that we work with.
It's like we're solving a puzzle for each person.
That's a great analogy, and one of the most valuable pieces of that puzzle can be understanding the power of natural reinforcers.
Natural reinforcers, what are those?
Natural reinforcers are those rewards that occur naturally as a result of engaging in a particular behavior.
Okay.
They're not something that we artificially create or deliver. Think about the feeling of accomplishment after completing a challenging task, the joy of playing a favorite game, or the satisfaction of helping someone in need.
It's about the intrinsic rewards that come from the activity itself.
Exactly. And when we can tap into those natural reinforcers, we create a more sustainable and meaningful form of motivation.
Yeah.
It's not about relying on external rewards, but about finding ways to make the activities themselves enjoyable and rewarding.
So it's about finding those activities that are inherently reinforcing for each person.
Precisely. And one of our sources highlights how powerful this can be, especially when we're thinking about long-term behavior change.
Right.
When people are intrinsically motivated, they're more likely to stick with things even when the going gets tough.
That makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already starting to see how I can apply this in my own work.
Okay.
Okay, so we've covered different types of reinforcers: primary, secondary, social, tangible, and natural.
Right.
But I'm also wondering about those times when we need to be more deliberate and structured with our reinforcement strategies.
Absolutely. There are definitely times when we need to create systems to support behavior change.
Exactly. So let's shift gears and talk about some practical strategies for making reinforcement truly effective.
That's a great idea. There are a lot of nuances to consider when implementing these concepts in the real world.
This is what I love about these deep dives.
Yeah.
We start with those core concepts, and then we get to see how it all comes together in practice. I'm ready for those aha moments.
I think you're going to find this next part really insightful. Get ready to take some notes.
I'm all ears.
Our sources highlight a few key principles that can make a huge difference in how we apply these concepts. And one of the most important is immediacy.
Immediacy. What do you mean by that?
So, immediacy refers to how quickly we deliver the reinforcer after the behavior occurs. The closer in time the reinforcement is to the behavior, the stronger the connection and the more effective it will be.
So it's about catching people doing things right and acknowledging their efforts right away.
Exactly. Think about it. If you receive praise for a job well done, like weeks after you completed the task, it's not going to have the same impact as if you'd received that praise immediately.
Right. It's like the connection between the behavior and the reward gets weaker the longer we wait.
Precisely. And this applies to both positive and negative reinforcement. If we want to increase a behavior, we need to reinforce it quickly.
Uh-huh.
And if we want to decrease a behavior, we need to remove that reinforcer as soon as possible.
That makes sense, but I can also see how this could be challenging in some real-world settings, right? We're not always in a position to observe every behavior.
Right.
And sometimes it's just not feasible to deliver reinforcement immediately.
You're absolutely right. There are certainly limitations to how consistently we can apply this principle, but even striving for greater immediacy can make a big difference. And when immediate reinforcement just isn't possible, we can use a technique called bridging.
Bridging? I've never heard of that. What is it?
Okay, so bridging is a way to maintain that connection between the behavior and the reinforcer when there's a delay. It involves providing a temporary reinforcer that kind of bridges the gap between the behavior and the ultimate reward.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine a child working on a lengthy task like building a complex Lego structure.
Okay.
We might not be able to provide the ultimate reinforcer, maybe it's getting to play a video game, until the entire structure is complete, but we can use bridging to keep them motivated along the way.
So we might give them a high five for completing each section of the structure or offer verbal praise for their focus and effort.
Exactly. Those small immediate reinforcers help to bridge the gap and keep the child engaged until they can access that ultimate reward.
It's like providing those little milestones along the way to keep them moving towards that goal.
Precisely. And bridging can be incredibly effective in a variety of settings, from classrooms to workplaces to our homes.
This is really helpful. So we've got immediacy, reinforcing as close in time to the behavior as possible.
Right.
And we've got bridging, using those temporary reinforcers to maintain motivation when there's a delay. What other tips do our sources highlight?
Another crucial aspect of effective reinforcement is consistency.
Right.
We touched on this briefly when talking about Extinction, but it's worth emphasizing again. Consistency is really key to creating clear expectations and shaping behavior reliably.
So it's about sending a clear message about what behaviors are reinforced and which ones are not.
Exactly, and this can be tough because, we're human.
Right.
We have our own moods, distractions, and competing priorities. But the more consistent we can be with our reinforcement, the more effective it will be.
So it's about setting ourselves up for success by creating systems and routines that support consistent reinforcement.
Absolutely. That might involve using visual reminders, setting clear expectations, and even enlisting the support of others to help us stay on track.
That's a great point. It's not always about doing it all alone. We can leverage the power of teamwork and collaboration.
Right. And here's another practical tip. Be specific with your reinforcement.
Specific. What do you mean by that?
So it's about letting the individual know exactly what behavior you're reinforcing. Instead of just saying, good job, try to be more descriptive.
Okay.
You might say, I really appreciate how you waited patiently for your turn, or you did a great job following the instructions.
So it's about painting a clear picture of what they did well and why it matters.
Exactly. And this is especially important when we're trying to shape new or complex behaviors. By being specific, we provide clear feedback that guides the individual towards success.
It's like giving them a roadmap to follow.
Precisely. And when we combine these strategies, immediacy, bridging, consistency, and specificity, we create these really powerful reinforcement systems that can truly make a difference.
This is fantastic information. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of positive and negative reinforcement and how I can use them more effectively in my ABA practice. Before we wrap up this deep dive, though, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something that's been on my mind. We've talked a lot about the technical aspects of reinforcement.
Right.
But what about the human element?
Yeah.
How do we approach reinforcement in a way that's both effective and compassionate?
That's such an important question. At the end of the day, we're not just technicians applying principles, we're humans interacting with other humans.
Right.
And that means approaching this work with empathy, understanding, and respect.
So it's not about manipulating behavior. It's about supporting individuals in their growth and development.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own unique journey, that we all have our strengths and challenges, and that progress can sometimes be slow and uneven.
Right.
It's about celebrating those small victories
Yeah.
and providing encouragement along the way.
And it's about remembering that reinforcement isn't just about those external rewards. It's about fostering that intrinsic motivation,
Absolutely.
about helping individuals discover the joy and satisfaction that comes from learning, growing, and contributing to the world around them.
That's beautifully said.
It's about combining those technical skills with that human touch,
Yes.
that genuine care for the individuals we're working with.
Absolutely. And when we can strike that balance, we unlock the true power of these principles.
I love that. This whole deep dive has been so insightful. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of positive and negative reinforcement and how I can use them more effectively in my ABA practice.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And to all our listeners out there, keep those great questions coming.
And remember, the journey of learning and growth never ends. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep striving to make a positive difference in the lives of those you serve. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating ABA topic. Until then, keep up the amazing work you're doing.